And you can start whenever you want.
Okay. Chapter 7. In Maria's experience, famous people were usually less imposing in person than their images, but Neil Gismondi seemed larger in real life. He stood over 6 feet tall, with a straight back bearing that stretched the impression even higher. His features were delicate, his skin was agelessly smooth, his long hair black and silky. "Oh, he's prettier than I am," was Adia's immediate thought. "Councilwomen," Gismondi said, with a grand sweep of one arm, "I'm honored." Against every instinct in their bodies, Maria and Adia both rose to their feet and dipped their heads. "No, no, please sit," said Gismondi, waving off the protocol. To Maria's surprise, he was more charming than pompous, and he appeared to meet her eyes with genuine interest. Maybe they would get somewhere with this tyrant after all. As the women settled back into their chairs, Gismondi took his seat at the head of the table. They had expected him to arrive with an entourage, a security detail at least, but it was just the three of them. Gismondi leaned forward, his forehead furrowed with serious intent. "I understand that we have some issues to discuss," said Gismondi. He looked earnestly from Maria to Adia, and then opened his arms in a gesture that seemed to embrace them both, his expression suddenly bright. "But who can negotiate on an empty stomach?" On cue, a door at the far end of the room swung open, and a server appeared with a silver tray holding 3 small plates and 3 glasses of champagne. "I never eat a big meal while conducting business," Gismondi said. "Small servings are better, don't you agree? Less blood to the belly. We all need our brains working at full capacity, do we not?" Maria and Adia stepped on each other's replies, a mumbled mangle of "definitely" and "of course." Each plate held several small toasted bread slices surrounding a tiny glass bowl. The bowls were filled with what looked like white tiny pearls. In spite of themselves, the councilwomen leaned in, curious. "Almas caviar," said Gismondi, "harvested only from sturgeons over 100 years old, the finest in the world, and hard to come by." He plucked a single tiny egg from his bowl and held it between his thumb and forefinger. "We taste like this," he said. He placed the egg in the middle of his tongue. His guests reached into their bowls and followed suit. "Now," said Gismondi, "crush it and let the flavor pop." Maria went first. The texture of the tiny orb was like a large grain of couscous, but when she crushed it, her mouth flooded with a briny, creamy flavor unbelievably rich. Adia went next. An involuntary "wow" escaped her lips. She mentally scolded herself. The last thing she wanted was to be enjoying any part of this. The servant had disappeared. Gismondi lifted his glass and held it up to the light, appreciating the slow rise of the bubbles. 2077, he said, with a confidential whisper. "Exquisite year." Maria couldn't remember when she'd last tasted alcohol, let alone a glass of vintage champagne. She took a modest sip and felt the cool bubbles in her mouth. She looked across at Adia, who had already emptied her glass. She imagined Adia's Muslim father revolting in his grave. Adia nodded to Gismondi as if to confirm his opinion of the vintage. Suddenly, bubbles started to ooze from her mouth, as if the champagne were spilling back out. But Maria, a former physician, knew that this foam was something else. A shock of adrenaline shot through her gut. "Oh my God, what's wrong?" asked Maria. She turned frantically to Gismondi, who was sipping slowly from his own glass. "Mr. President," said Maria, "we need help." Adia's eyes were starting to roll back, showing only white. Agitated and scared, Maria craned her neck toward the door, expecting a rush of assistants or medics, anybody. "Please," said Gismondi, placing his cool hand on Maria's arm. "At this point, the key is to avoid panic." At that very moment, Maria felt a bitter warmth rise in her own throat, accompanied by a sudden hot stab in her skull. "Oh my God, no," thought Maria. It was the final thought of her short life. Adia, mercifully, had not even had time to think. The two women sprawled back in their chairs, heads rolled to the side, white foam trickling from their mouths. Gismondi leaned forward, his hand wrapped in a silk napkin. Slowly and carefully, he wiped the ooze from Maria's face, then from Adia's. "So unappetizing," he mumbled to himself. He settled back, placed another delicate fish egg into his mouth, and felt its tiny, delightful explosion. Chapter 8. My scooter is good for most of the ride downtown, but off the main streets it's pretty useless. I sling it over my shoulder and start walking. Down here near the harbor, the air is even smokier. There's a little breeze coming off the river, but it's not exactly refreshing, more like a mixture of dead fish and wet garbage. Mainly it's just a coincidence that the sky is clouding over. There aren't many people around, and the ones I can see are the type I keep my distance from. Definitely no eye contact. The whole place feels weird and spooky. The kind of neighborhood you should never come to all alone, but here I am. The first two warehouses I see are abandoned, doors turned off, windows broken. I'm sure people sleep here at night when there's no place else to go, but they're taking a chance. Those brick walls look like they might cave in any minute. When I get to the last warehouse, I realize I've got nothing else to go on. No key, no secret password. I wonder if Poole has warned somebody that I was coming. I'm not sure whoever's here will even let me in. There's only one door smack in the middle of the side facing the river. It's big and metal and covered with rust. There's no intercom or bell, so I step up and knock. Hard. I wait. Nothing. I knock harder. This time I hear a creaky sound from inside. The door starts to swing open. There's a man behind it. I can see his fizzy hair silhouetted by the light from inside. "Hey there," I say. "I'm Matty Gomes." For a few seconds the guy doesn't say anything. He just stares. "Hello," I say, waving my hands in front of his face, waiting for some response. "I'll be damned," he said. "You actually exist." Chapter 9. "Please," he says, opening the door just a little wider to invite me inside. I notice that he checks behind me to see if there's anybody else. He's kind of pudgy, with a pasty white face. He looks like he's been trying to grow a beard for a while, but still hasn't produced much foliage. Age? I'd guess about 40, but an old 40. Thick glasses, spongy gut. If it turns out I inherited a yacht, I doubt this guy is the captain. I step inside, and right away I realize that this is a grade A textbook setting for a pedophile liar. This wasn't a very bright move on my part. I do a quick look around. There's nothing obviously evil in sight, but I pull my scooter off my shoulder and hold it in front of me just in case. "Okay, what's going on?" I ask. "What's this place about? Who are you?" "I'm Dr. Fletcher," he says. "Julian Fletcher. He holds out his hand. I shake it. It's slick with perspiration. I can tell he's more nervous than I am, and that the shifts in power dynamic a little bit. I put down my scooter. He looks me up and down, but not in a creepy way. Then he focuses on my face, like he feels he should know me. It's incredible, he says. What's incredible? That you're actually here, that this is actually happening. You mean you've been waiting for me? He lets his breath out in a slow stream. You have no idea. I decided to give Fletcher a quick recap. I'm not sure I totally trust him, but I've got to start somewhere, and I need to get this process off the dime. Here's all I know, I say. I got a letter saying that I was the beneficiary of some mysterious will. The letter sent me to a lawyer. The lawyer started to give me the runaround. Poole, said Fletcher. He's an associate of mine. I'm surprised he let you come down here without him. Not his choice, I say. I step deeper into this huge, musty room, which looks like an old-time science lab. The windows are covered with some kind of blackout paint, but there must be a solid electrical feed because the lights are steady and some of the electronic boxes are humming. There's a big metal table covered in wires and dials and old electric parts, real collector's items. Not a single IC board or LED strip in the pile. It's like I'm stuck in an alternate time zone, and it's getting weirder by the minute. I see a hallway leading from one side of the room. There could be anything back there, but so far, the only sound in the place is the beeping from the machines on the table. Fletcher scratches his head. He rubs his palms on his shirt. He clears his throat. Finally, he looks around the room and pulls up a metal stool. Here, he says, patting the seat like he's training a puppy. Sit. I slid onto the stool and hooked my feet around it. Fletcher pulls up a worn and slouchy office chair. He's obviously spent so much time in it that it's molded to his shape. I'm perched above him on the stool, looking down on the bald patches on his blotchy scalp. I can imagine him plucking out strands of his own hair in his spare time. Nail biter, too, I'll bet. I've practiced this 1,000,000 times in my head, says Fletcher, but I can't believe I'm saying it for real. Now I'm starting to get a tingle. Not fear exactly, just the feeling you get when all your senses are on high alert because you're not sure which way things are going to go. Fight or flight, right? I lean down. So say it. He nods his head slowly like he's working up his nerve. Then he rolls his chair closer and looks straight at me. What you've inherited, Miss Gnomes, it's a body. Chapter 10. A body? Like what? An Egyptian mummy? Maybe somebody left me a valuable museum relic. Fletcher takes a deep breath. Bear with me, he says. I know this will make me sound crazy. He runs his hand through his hair again, but I'm not. He looks about to launch into some big monologue, then stops himself. Nope, he says. Enough talking. You need to see this. He walks toward a huge metal door on the other side of the room. In the center of the door is an enormous wheel, like the kind they use to turn off water ducts. He cranks the metal wheel, and I hear the door give way with a little suction sound. The hinges are wider than my whole hand. The metal is about 2 feet thick. The wispy little hairs on the back of my neck are tingling. My pulse is racing. The air from behind the door stings my nose like vinegar or cleaning solution. Fletcher leaps over the lower metal rim of the doorway. "Let's go," he says. I follow him into a small room with metal walls and a hatch on one side. Fletcher yanks a long lever and the hatch door drops down. He reaches in with both hands and pulls on the horizontal bar. He leans back for leverage. The bar is attached to a narrow table with tubes and wires running in from one side. I feel kind of sick and scared and excited at the same time because things have just efficiently gone from weird to insane. The table is all the way out now, and lying in the middle of it is a dead guy in a tux. Holy mother of crap! My heart feels like it's going to explode through my clothes. I take a quick step back and feel the cold metal wall against my spine. "What is this?" I say. "Is that guy really dead?" "Not exactly," says Fletcher. "His bodily processes have just been massively decelerated." Decelerated? Slowed way down. Heartbeat, circulation, tissue growth, everything. Everything has been happening in slow motion. I take a step closer to the almost but not quite corpse. There's a thick IV tube running under a bandage sticking out above his neck, and there's a low hum from some kind of coil under the table. What is this? And why is he dressed for a party? It's just what he happened to be wearing in 1937. 1937? I run the numbers in my head. You're telling me that he's been lying here for 150 years? That's correct, says Fletcher. I know it's hard to... And what are you, some kind of zombie assistant? I wasn't trying to be funny. I was just trying to tie this situation to anything that made sense, and I wasn't having much luck. I inherited his care, says Fletcher. He's nervous and excited. This facility has been in my family for generations. I've been waiting for the right time to move him to the next stage. What stage is that? Revivification, bringing him back. That's what I'm here for. I take a deep breath. No way this is happening. You're going to bring him back to life? That's the plan. So why have you been waiting all this time? Like I said, I've been waiting for you. I've got all kinds of questions running through my head. Big questions, starting with, why me? But sometimes when the questions are too big, it helps to focus on details. At least that's the way my brain works. So I focus on the guy on the table. Handsome, maybe early 40s. His face looks perfect, but there's some kind of yellowish, whitish crust on the front of his tux and shirt, like he threw up at a wedding. What's that mess all over him? Poison residue, says Fletcher. He probably vomited after ingestion, a reflex reaction. What the... Relax, we're fine, said Fletcher. The compounds are inert. The potency dissipated with the deceleration process, which was the whole theory in the first place. That part worked. The poison didn't kill him. Whether it damaged him internally, who knows? Whether I can actually bring his organs and consciousness back to anything close to full function, that's the real challenge. I've never been the kind to get queasy at the sight of dead bodies, but something about this situation is too bizarre, too creepy. I'm done. I start backing toward the door. No way I'm part of this, I say. This is nuts. Fletcher grabs my arm. Stop, wait, he says. Think about it. It's not just me who's been waiting for you. He points to the guy on the table. He's been waiting for you. Him. He's been waiting since before you were born. Fletcher is holding my upper arm like a vice. When I tug at him, he relaxes his grip. What makes me so special, I ask? Why not some super scientist or brain surgeon? Why not some big shot from the government? I don't know, said Fletcher. Maybe he can tell you, but he can't tell you while he's like this. I step back toward the table and look at the guy's face again. In some ways, it looks just like he went to sleep. Like the guy in that old story, Rip Van whatever. So who is he, I say? Does he have a name? He does, said Fletcher. His name is Lamont Cranston. What did you say? Fletcher repeats it, pronouncing each syllable. Lamont Cranston. Okay, good joke. That's obviously a fake name, because I'm an expert on Lamont Cranston, a.k.a. the Shadow, and there's no way that's a real person. Fletcher's not in the mood to debate names. Mr. Lamont Cranston is what it said on the intake sheet. That's all he knows. So I decide not to push it. All Fletcher cares about right now is bringing this guy back into the land of living. In fact, he looked a little obsessed. Okay, how do we do it? I asked. We, said Fletcher. Do you have a medical degree? I got straight A's in science, I said. How many bodies have you brought back to life? Actually, he said, this would be my first. All right then, let's call us even. What's the process? Fletcher steps out into the main room and comes back with a stack of old binders and textbooks, really torn, old, and falling apart. It's all in here, he says, theoretically. He points to his head, and in here. And the theory is, I asked. I think Fletcher has probably spent so much time alone in this temple of doom that he likes having somebody he can lecture to. He starts flipping through the binders and notebooks, looking back and forth. And as he flips, he talks, like he's been waiting forever to spill it out. When Mr. Cranston arrived in 1937, he was dying from ingestion of a toxin probably derived from sea snake venom. Incredibly destructive. So before he was clinically dead, his body was cryogenically cooled. He was frozen? Super cool, said Fletcher. Human cells can't survive actual freezing. Ice crystal formation ruptures the cell membranes. There's no way you could thaw a fully frozen organism and expect a positive result. He points to the IV tube running into the guy's ankle, right above his roll-down sock. He's been suffused with a vitrification solution to keep his cells viable in low temperatures. Like antifreeze, I asked. A bit more complex than that, but yes, similar notion. Under cryogenic deceleration, his heart has been pumping, his blood has been flowing, his cells have been regenerating, but barely. In 150 years, he's probably aged 10. He taps one of the old notebooks. If the solution reacts with an electrical charge in the right way, it should restore function. You're going to electrocute him? Yes, said Fletcher, very gently. Chapter 12. Gently my foot. My first jolt makes the first jolt makes the body jump, and the first jolt makes the body jump an inch off the table. Fletcher adjusts the settings on his little hand controller. It's connected to the coil under the table by a couple of wires. The body settles back down again. Fletcher flinches. This doesn't look good. Well, if he wasn't dead before, I say, he's probably dead now. Quiet, said Fletcher. He thumbs through his notebooks again. I can see him trying to come up with another idea, and he does. All right, he says, I'm going to try a saline flush. He points to a metal chest on the other side of the room. There, get 2 bags for me. I open the chest. It's an aluminum cooler filled with sacks of clear fluid. I hand the couple to Fletcher. They feel thick like water balloons. He hooks them to a rack at the side of the table and attaches tubes so that the fluid runs into the IV line, which one runs directly into a vein under the guy's ankle. Then he attaches a syringe to a rubber connector. "What's this for?" I asked. "The concentration of the preservation solution might be too high. I'm trying to dilute it. Plus the saline is conductive." "So they covered all this stuff in med school?" I asked. When I'm nervous, I just try to make conversation. Fletcher's nose is buried in the binders again, turning pages back and forth. "I'm not a medical doctor," he says. "I'm a PhD in organic chemistry." He looks up. "Big disappointment to my family." "Great. So what if this guy wakes up and he has a heart attack?" "I'm really hoping that doesn't happen," said Fletcher. "The IV line is wide open. I can actually see the solution flowing through the tube as Fletcher presses the plunger on the syringe. "Okay," says Fletcher. "I'm ready to reapply voltage. Stay clear." He picks up his little box again, like a kid with an old-time game controller. He turns the dial slowly. The coil begins to whine again. I see the body start to pulse and vibrate, shaking the whole table. Fletcher is sweating. Come on," he mumbles. Suddenly the IV line bursts from under the bandage and whips out, spraying solution all over the place. The body goes into a spasm, then settles back down. Fletcher turns pale and shuts the power off. "Oh no," he yells. At this point, I'm past being grossed out by anything. I grab the end of the IV tube and hold it up. Sticky liquid drips all over my fingers, but I don't care. "Fix it," I said. "Reattach it. Let's go." "It's not working," said Fletcher. "I have to modify the protocol." He shoves the pile of notebooks aside. At this point, I have no idea if the guy on the table has any life left in him, but it still hurts to see him like this. I put the IV tube down on the side of the table. The back of my hand accidentally brushes the bare skin of the ankle where his sock is rolled down. The skin feels cool, but not ice cold like I expected. Then something else. A little shudder. A flicker of movement right under the skin. "Wait, look," I shout. Fletcher leans over the table next to me. The ankle twitches again. "Just a fasciculation, an involuntary muscle movement," said Fletcher. "A little aftershock." But now the spasm gets bigger. It runs up his side until his whole leg is trembling. I move to the head of the table. I see a slight movement in his chin. Maybe I'm just imagining it, or maybe there's still a chance. "There has to be something else we can do," I say. I hate to fail at anything, always have. Now my face is just a few inches from his. There, another twitch of the chin. Now a little jerk in his neck. What happens next is a blur. Don't ask me to describe my thinking, because I can't. I'm operating on pure adrenaline. Why else would I lean over and plant my mouth over the mouth of the guy who's been in a musty vault for more than a century? But that's what I'm doing. My lips are locked over his. I'm blowing air into him. Yuck. Maybe this is my punishment for cutting class. I push in a couple of quick breaths. Nothing Fletcher sees. He's frozen like a statue. He can't believe this. I can't either. I adjust my angle. I press my fingers over his nose so air won't escape. This is nothing like kissing. It's the opposite of kissing. I feel like a human air pump. I give him 2 more breaths, harder this time. I feel Fletcher's hands on my shoulders pulling me back. "Stop it," he says. "Are you crazy?" Suddenly the guy arches on the table. I hear a deep, scratchy rattle in his throat. Then his eyes pop wide open. His head flexes up for a second and then drops back onto the table. His head turns. His eyes look straight at me. His lips move. He gasps. Then he starts talking, slow and hesitant. "What time is it?" he asked. I check the clock on the wall. 12 o'clock, I tell him, on the dot. "And what day is this?" "July 1st, 2087, I say, 12 o'clock. At the World President's residence, 2 levels below the dining room, Soner Brees, Chief of Staff, carefully examined the 2 dead councilwomen. They were now lying naked on stone slabs in what he liked to call his study. Laboratory sounded too clinical, although he certainly used the space for experiments. Unlike the grabby guards outside, Brees had no prurient interest in female bodies. He was interested only in efficiency and effectiveness, and in what the bodies could teach him. He was not a scientist, he was a scientist and a scholar. His room was filled not just with instruments, but also with beautiful things. Leather-bound books, some of the last in existence, graceful furniture, and ancient pottery. The walls, already 2 feet thick and made of granite, had been augmented by soundproofing panels because some of Brees's procedures get a bit noisy. But now the silence was broken only by the chirp of a pair of rainbow finches fluttering from perch to perch in a cage suspended in a corner of the room. "Pretty birds," said Breech in a soft, affectionate voice as he pulled a pair of syringes from a plastic case. From each woman's salvific vein, he drew a small sample of blood and deposited it in a petri dish. He used this thin tube to add a few drops to a test solution. He watched as the mixture bubbled and turned powder pink. Brees frowned. Acceptable potency, but not optimal. For mass quantities, the formula would need to be perfected. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and jotted down some figures. Back in his years as a university professor, he would have had a team of assistants to work on the project, but now he would have to do it all himself. No matter, it was a passion for him, researching the very best way to kill the maximum number of people. Brees was fond of the old-fashioned saying, "Find a job you love, and you'll never work a day in your life." Right now, of course, he had a task that most people would find highly distasteful. For Brees, it was just a matter of selecting the proper tool. He ran his eyes over the 2 bodies in front of him and made some quick mental calculations. Yes, the 9-inch reciprocating saw would work perfectly. Chapter 14. I can't believe what I'm seeing. An hour ago, this guy was lying on a metal table. Now, sitting in a chair out in the lab, trying to make conversation. Incredible. I can't even imagine what he must be feeling. At first, his sentences were kind of choppy, as if his brain were broken into a bunch of puzzle pieces. But gradually, he's getting the hang of it. He shrugs off the blanket Fletcher gives him, like he's in a rush to get back to normal. Does he even remember what normal was? Does he remember anything? "My name is Lamont Cranston." That's what he keeps saying. I know he's not Lamont Cranston. Lamont Cranston was a radio detective from the 1930s, totally fictional. But I decided not to make a thing of it. I call him Lamont for now, just to humor him. We can get his true identity straightened out later. I'm sure he has bigger stuff on his mind. Assuming his mind still works. I thinks that's up for grabs. He looks around the room. He looks at Fletcher. He looks at me. His eyes flicker. Where is this? He asks. Fletcher rolls his saggy old chair up close to him. Hey, he says, let's take one thing at a time. Baby steps, okay? I'm Dr. Fletcher. Lamont's face brightens a little. Fenton? Fenton Fletcher? Fletcher? Fletcher leans closer. Fenton Fletcher was an ancestor of mine, he says, way back. My name is Julian Fletcher. Lamont tries to absorb the connection but gives up. He turns to me. And you? I'm Maddie Gomes. Why am I here? Asked Lamont. I look back at Fletcher. He clears his throat. His PhD classes probably didn't prepare him for this conversation, the one where you tell a guy that he's been almost dead since the last century. Mr. Cranston, Fletcher says, you were poisoned, a fatal dose, back in 1937. Lamont blinks. I can almost see his brain starting to make connections, thinking back. Somewhere in there, neurons must be firing. He rubs his face, starts to talk, hesitates, then starts again. His voice is still cracking. I died, he says, but now I'm alive? Something like that, yes, says Fletcher. Lamont exhales slowly. Can I get you anything, I ask? What do you need? Lamont looks at me in a way nobody's ever looked at me before, like he's actually trying to reach into my mind. Suddenly he stands up, but he has no sense of balance. He starts to fall forward. I reach out to catch him, but Fletcher gets to him first. Lamont twists away and starts back toward the vault. There's nothing there, said Fletcher. He's trying to sound soothing, but Lamont is getting more and more determined. He starts down the dim hallway that leads off the main room. Fletcher moves to block the way. Stop, he says, you'll get hurt. Fletcher wraps Lamont up in a bear hug and practically carries him back to the chair. Lamont doesn't have the strength to fight back. Just standing up and moving across the room has taken a lot out of him. Margot, he says, Margot Lane. Where is she? Margot Lane? Wait, I'm totally confused. Margot Lane was Lamont Cranston's friend and companion on the radio. There's no way she's a real person either. Air! Lamont starts shouting. I need air. Chapter 15. On the wide cement step outside the warehouse, Lamont took his first outdoor breath in a very, very long time. It was a big disappointment. In fact, it reeked. There was someone at his side, the girl. Maddie? Was that her name? Lamont was still trying to figure out who she was. A secretary? A nurse? She was standing close, as if she expected him to tip over. His brain felt like cotton, and his eyes were slightly out of focus. Everything in his view was cloudy. It was just one of 1,000 ways in which his body didn't feel quite like his. He tried to orient himself to his surrounding. Is that the East River? He asked. It is, said Maddie. Why is it so high? Asked Lamont. The brackish water lapped across the bare lot in front of the warehouse, only a few yards from where they stood. Maddie shrugged. The water's been rising for years, she said, for as long as I've been alive. "And what's that in the air?" Lamont asked. "Is something on fire?" The air near the river was filled with smoke. "Just cooking fire," said Maddie. "People need to eat." Lamont shook his head. It was like the depression had never ended, and his vision started to clear, and he saw small groups of people shuffling nearby. They all had matted hair and wore shapeless clothes. He saw a line of them passing close by the warehouse, headed for the river. A young woman was in the lead, trailed by a string of small children, following like silent lemmings. "Where are they going?" asked Lamont. Then something flashed in his memory. He'd seen this before, more than a century ago. Drowning was one way to end the pain, and sometimes the poorest of the poor took that way out. This was a suicide walk. Lamont stepped off the cement step and walked toward the woman. In seconds he was in water up to his calves. Maddie tried to support him, but he shook her off. "Stop," he called out to the woman. His voice was still weak. It didn't reach. He heard Maddie shout too. She was right behind him. The woman heard Maddie. She paused as the children crowded around her, just inches from the edge of the water. Lamont was close now, close enough to reach her. The woman turned her face toward him. Lamont looked at her intently, deeply, deliberately. "Do not jump," he said. "Back away." The woman was hollow-eyed and pale. She said nothing. "Do not die," said Lamont. "Do not die." Slowly the woman turned away from the river. The others followed. The woman placed her hands on the shoulders of the children as they shuffled back toward the smoky campfires beyond the warehouse. Lamont looked down. Maddie was staring at him. "What did you just do?" she asked. Lamont looked out over the river where a few abandoned barges floated aimlessly, then back at the woman and children disappearing into the haze. "Maybe," he said, "I gave them hope." Chapter 16. As we walk back toward the warehouse, I can see Lamont getting more energetic, a little more sure on his feet. He stops to look at me. "Maddie," he says. "That's a good name." "Thanks," I say. At least he has some short-term memory left. I wonder if I should tell him that it was my little mouth mumbo that finally brought him back, but I decide not to say anything. Let him believe that he advanced science, revived himself. That's what he paid for, right? "Maddie," he says, "I need to go home. Maybe Margot will be there." "Where's home?" I asked. I realize that I have no idea where he's from, where he lived, or how he got here. "My townhouse," he says. He turns to face north. "That way." After 150 years, any place he'd used to live has probably been torn down or boarded up. But I decide to play along. "No problem," I say. "We'll find a way there, slowly." But Lamont is already gathering steam, heading for the alley between the warehouses. He's shaking his arms like trying to get the feeling back. "Hold on," I yell. "Wait up." I duck back inside the warehouse to grab my scooter. Fletcher is still sitting in his saggy seat, scribbling in a notebook. "Lamont's on a mission," I tell him. "He wants to go uptown." Fletcher closes his notebook and leans forward in his chair. "Are you crazy?" he says. "What?" I say. "You want to put him back in the vault?" "You know he could drop dead at any minute, right?" said Fletcher. "We kick-started him, but nobody knows the effects of long-term deceleration." "Look," I say, "I know he's your little secret experiment, but he's my inheritance. I'll watch him." "I'm telling you, he needs to be monitored," said Fletcher. "He's not ready for a tour of the city." I realize that what Fletcher is saying makes sense, Things are moving a little too fast. What if Lamont needs another jolt? You're right, I say. I'll get him. I head back outside. It's been less than 20 seconds, but now I realize it was a mistake to let Lamont out of my sight, because when I look down the alley, he's gone. Chapter 17. Chirp, chirp. It's the sound of an electronic alert from a parked car up the street. A luxury L20 electric coupe, the latest Chinese import. I spot Lamont looking baffled in the driver's seat as I run up alongside the car and tap on the half-open window. Hey, I say, you've been alive for 2 hours and now you're stealing cars? We'll just borrow it, said Lamont. Just show me how to work. I see him struggling for the right words. The thing. He looks over the dashboard and shakes his head. Where's the tack? He said. The fuel gauge, the speedometer. He's staring at the black plastic control screen, and I realize he has no idea what it's for. I open the driver's side door. Lamont, I say, maybe we should do this tomorrow. No, he shouts, now. I decide not to argue with him. Truth is, I can't wait to get out of this neighborhood myself. I nudge him on the shoulder. Shove over. I toss my scooter into the rear compartment. Lamont slides over to the passenger side. I've seen cars like this, but I've never touched one, never sat in one, never driven one, never driven at all, in fact. Cars are for rich people, not for poor kids like me. But how hard can it be? I press the red power button on the console and the car starts to hum. The screen lights up. The icon kind of makes sense. Where to, I say. North, said Lamont. 5th Avenue, number... He pauses and rubs his head, trying to remember. Never mind the number, I say. The addresses have all changed anyway. Just go, said Lamont, please. I tap the icon for forward. As I move away from the curb, I sideswipe a traffic control stanchion. The car's side panel crunches like popcorn. Sorry about that, I mumble. Not too familiar with this model. I quickly re-tap the touch screen and switch to auto run. The ride smooths out when the car locks into the lane sensors. I look over at Lamont. Don't worry, I tell him. If your house is still there, we'll find it. Within 10 seconds, the car is up to 50 on 1st Avenue. I see Lamont bracing his feet against the floor panel and pressing himself into the seatback. I look down at the screen and barely miss a guy carrying a stack of salvage wood. On the 40th Street intersection, I see a crew of pavers ahead. I think they expect me to slow down. When I don't, they jump out of the way, dropping their tools in the middle of the street. I run over the tip of a shovel and the handle flips up. Crash! So much for the driver's side headlight. Good Lord, shouts Lamont, where did you learn to drive? Self-taught, I say. I lean out my window and let the wind whip my air away from my face. This beats a scooter any day. Chapter 18. North of 23rd Street, underground suppressors automatically slow the car down to 30. I take it off auto and make some quick dog legs to avoid police checkpoints, just in case somebody's already reported a stolen vehicle. After a few maneuvers, I head up 3rd Avenue. The slower speed gives Lamont a good look at the city, and I can see that he's disgusted. In this part of town, there's no mix of rich and poor. It's all poor. Everybody with money has moved closer to 5th Avenue. On this block, just about every building is shuttered and boarded up. The few shops that are still open have long lines outside. When I pause at a stoplight, a squad of grubby kids scurry up to knock on the window. "Get away," Lamont yells. "Leave." He pounds back from his side of the window. "They just want candy," I tell him, then press the horn to startle the kids as they move on. I'm not worried about the candy kids. I used to be one myself. I'm more worried about the teen gangs, like the ones I see lurking on the next corner. That bunch would think nothing of slashing a tire or throwing a waste bin through a windshield. "Who's in charge here?" asks Lamont, his voice rising. "Where's the mayor?" "There's no mayor," I tell him. "Gizmondi runs everything." "Who?" "No, Gizmondi," I reply, "the world president." "What happened to Roosevelt?" "Never mind." I don't think Lamont's up for a history lesson right now. Like Fletcher said, baby steps. I doubt he'd believe it anyway. As we approach a little boga on the corner of 53rd Street, I hear shouts from inside. Through the shop's dirty window, I can see figures scuffling. Suddenly, two young guys burst out of the front carrying bags. The shop owner runs after them. He grabs one guy by the arm. Not a good idea. The young guy swings his elbow back like a hammer, catches the storeman hard in the face. He falls on the pavement. "Did you see that?" Lamont says, pounding on the smooth dash panel. "Where are the police?" "The police don't bother with street crime," I say, "unless the victim is rich or connected. Otherwise, you're on your own." "That's insane," says Lamont. "That's life," I tell him. I can see that Lamont is starting to boil inside. I'm sure he's wondering what kind of world he came back to. I see him looking back at the shop owner in the street. "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men," Lamont says. I have to laugh just a little. I can't help it. Whoever this guy is, I have to admit he does a pretty decent shadow impression. Chapter 19. "What's funny?" Lamont asked. "Nothing," I say, keeping my eyes locked on the road. "It's just," I lower my voice and imitate his imitation. "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?" "What about it?" said Lamont. "It's not funny. It's true. There's no telling how deep evil can go. I mean, look around. I'm seeing nothing but evil." I can't tell if Lamont's putting me on. He seems sincere, really troubled about the state of the city. On the other hand, he's had a weird brew of drugs circulating through his body for a long time. Who knows what that might have done to his brain? "So are you a fan of The Shadow?" I asked. "I mean, from the radio show that was on during the 1930s, right?" Lamont is staring out the window. Nobody I know has the slightest interest in an obscure comic book hero from the past century. But there's something about The Shadow that had always appealed to me, especially the power of invisibility. I mean, how cool would that be? Wait, I have another thought. Are you an actor? That might explain the fancy tux and the handsome face. Were you on the radio? Did you play The Shadow? Were you The Shadow? "An actor?" Lamont says. "You think I'm some kind of fake?" "I just figured maybe that's why you picked the name." "My name is my name," he says, and then, "Watch out." A car is veering toward us. I make a hard left onto 57th Street, missing the other guy by inches. "Sorry," I say, "I'll pay attention." But it's a good thing I turned west when I did. Any higher and we'd be getting close to Central Park, which is one place on the island I did not want to be. We're coming up to 5th Avenue, 1 block away. As we pass Madison, Lamont starts looking anxious. He whips his head from side to side, checking out various buildings back and forth. Suddenly he sits right up in his seat, so fast that his head almost hits the roof panel of the sedan. He points straight ahead. That's it, right there. That's my house. I slow down and pull the car over to the curb. I look up to the street where he's pointing. You're kidding, right? Of course not, said Lamont. That's it. I live right there. I should know. I designed every inch of it. I recognize the building. Who wouldn't? But there's no way we're getting anywhere near it because it's the official residence of the world president. Chapter 20. Lamont doesn't understand. The world president, he said. What are you talking about? Lamont, listen to me, I said, turning to look him straight in the eye. There's no mayor, there's no Roosevelt, no kings, no queens, no prime ministers. They're all gone. Only one single solitary man holds all the power. One man. He runs everything. If you question him, you're gone. And he lives, I jabbed my finger toward the mansion, right there. We're stopped about 20 yards short of the main gate. Already I've attracted the attention of a few perimeter drones and a squad of sector police. The police roll up in 2 patrol vehicles with armor platings and black bumpers. 10 grins, I say, right behind us. Who? Says Lamont. Police, coppers, the fuzz, whatever you used to call them. 4 men hop off the running boards and form a human barrier in front of our car. The drivers pull their vehicles into a V to block my way. We're screwed, I say. Do not move. Lamont opens his door. Stop, I say. They'll kill you. What are you doing? Lamont slams the door behind him and walks right up to 2 officers on his side. They raise their rifles. When they see Lamont's tux, they think it's some kind of crazy costume. One of the officers actually laughs. This gets Lamont more fired up. His sentences are almost normal now, even though he's talking crazy. Hey, he says, that's my house right there, mine. The officers aren't overreacting. They probably don't want a scene that would attract the presidential guards. That would be a mess. This is as far as you go, says one of the 10 grins. I can hear his voice amplified through his chest speaker. I don't think you heard me, Lamont said. The barrels of the rifles are an inch from his belly. Suddenly the squad converges on him from all sides. I sit frozen in the car, terrified of making a wrong move, a fatal move. I have one chance. If I can isolate the squad leader one-on-one, maybe I can get him to back off. But as I try to open my door, one of the other 10 grins leans on his solid hip against it. I'm trapped, and now Lamont is locked inside a pack of officers. I see the side door of one of the police vehicles slide open. It's like a dark box inside. Lamont is now totally surrounded by black uniforms. Only his head is visible. He turns my way and jerks his chin upward. I know what he means. He means go. I hesitate for a second, but there's nothing I can do to stop what's happening to Lamont. And there's no sense in getting locked up with him. As long as I'm free, I still have options, maybe. I tap the screen to put the car into reverse. I swerve backwards, spinning the 10 grins on my side to his knees. I back up until the front of the car is clear of the police vehicles, then whip around and head back in the other direction. In 2 seconds, I'm speeding down the block. I know I'm an easy target, but gunshots would stir the presidential detail, and that's the last thing they want. They don't care about me anyway. They know they've got the real troublemaker. I'm so mad at myself that I can hardly see. I promise to watch out for Lamont. Great job. Chapter 21. Lamont felt himself being half dragged, half shoved toward the open door of the police vehicle. He was close enough now to see a metal bench running the width of the interior. One of the officers went in first. The two men holding Lamont's arm shoved him forward. He shook off their grip and stepped into the vehicle on his own. He slid onto the cold metal seat. Lamont was no stranger to police. He'd dealt with them all the time. Sure, some of them were crooks, some were thugs, but most of them were okay. Men you could work with, drink with, share tips with. But that was then. This was now. And these guys weren't the talkative type. Lamont was in trouble, and he knew it. He had come back to life just to end up with a bullet in his head. There was only one way out, and he figured he had only 3 seconds to make his move. He wasn't sure he could do it. It had been a long time. As the officer to Lamont's left slid further in to make room, another officer stepped into the box to bracket Lamont on the seat. Lamont closed his eyes. It was now or never. Then it happened, just like he remembered. The feeling was like the rise over the top of a roller coaster. The burst of energy shot through him and seemed to cause his organs to vibrate. There was a moment of near blackout and then a fluid sensation. He saw the officers panic and spin around, looking in every direction. They brought their rifles up, but there was nothing to shoot at. Lamont stepped outside the vehicle, feeling a power that he hadn't felt in more than 100 years. He was back. He was alive. He was invisible.